Welcome to my channel, Nighttime Frights. My channel is dedicated to stories about the dark and mysterious, all designed to lull you to sleep. If you, like me, love these stories, don't forget to subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments which story you want me to tell next. The Utah desert stretches vast and indifferent, a place where the earth seems to fold in on itself. Rust-red hills rise against the sky, dotted with sparse junipers and low sagebrush, while the wind whispers over the sand and stone. Beneath this quiet surface lies another world, a hidden network of twisting limestone passages, tight squeezes, and dark chambers that for centuries remain untouched. This is Nutty Putty Cave, a name that sounds almost playful, harmless, as if it were something invented for children. But anyone who had been inside knew better. The cave is alive with claustrophobic mystery. Its walls are soft and damp, streaked with clay-like minerals that smear onto your skin like putty. Some passages open wide enough for a man to crawl, while others taper down to cracks that only the smallest could worm through. It is not a cave for the faint of heart. Even seasoned cavers emerge coated in mud, scraped raw at the elbows, breathing hard from the endless squeezing and crawling. For some, though that was the draw, John was 26, young but old enough to feel the tug of adulthood. He was in the thick of medical school at the University of Virginia. His days divided between anatomy labs, late-night study sessions, and the quiet moments he could steal with his wife, Emily. They had a daughter, just 13 months old, who had inherited his calm brown eyes and his laugh. Emily was pregnant again, their family expanding in the same steady rhythm of which John tackled every part of his life. He had grown up in Utah, part of a large, close-knit Mormon family. Adventure ran through their blood. Summers spent hiking the Wasatch Mountains, winters skiing, and more than a few weekends exploring caves. Utah County had dozens of small limestone systems scattered across its dry hillsides. To a boy, they were both dangerous and irresistible, dark places where your imagination could run wild. John loved those caves, and Nutty Putty had been one of the favorites when he was younger. It wasn't the kind of cavern with glittering stalactites or cathedral-like chambers. Instead, it offered something raw, a test of will. Could you push your body into places your instincts screamed against? Could you breathe calmly with solid stone pressing against your chest? John could. He had always been steady, his faith and his strength intertwined. In late November of 2009, John and Emily traveled back to Utah for Thanksgiving. His family would all be together, siblings, parents, nieces, nephews. The Jones family was large, full of laughter and teasing, and their reunions were always an event. But John also wanted something else, a night out with his brother, Josh. The two had grown up close, and now that John lived far away for school, time together was rare. They decided to gather a small group of friends and cousins for one of the old adventures they had loved as boys, a trip into Nutty Putty Cave. The plan wasn't reckless. They weren't thrill-seeking teenagers anymore. They were men, husbands, fathers. But the call of the underground still had power. On Tuesday night, November 24th, as the sun dipped behind the Ochre Mountains, John and Josh drove with their group toward the cave. Their headlights cut across the empty desert road, until at last they reached a low ridge where Nutty Putty's entrance was hidden. The entrance to Nutty Putty was nothing grand. No yawning mouth of rock or gaping hole. Instead, it was a narrow opening in the ground, partially covered with a metal gate. The state had installed it years earlier to regulate access after several rescues. The cave had a reputation. More than once, young spelunkers had become lodged in its passages, requiring teams to haul them out after hours of struggle. Still, the gate was open to permitted groups, and that night the Jones brothers and their friends signed in and prepared for crawl. Each carried headlamps, helmets, and simple gear, gloves, knee pads, and a few ropes. They weren't planning anything extreme. Just a night of exploration, laughter, and nostalgia. Before long, the group lowered themselves into the dark, leaving behind the cold desert air for the heavy stillness of the underground. Their lamps carved tunnels of light through the blackness, bouncing off damp, clay-smeared walls. Voices echoed strangely, laughter carrying down tight corridors. Caves exert a peculiar attraction. Wide chambers are impressive, but for many, it's the tight squeezes that hold the most fascination. They offer a challenge, A battle not with rock, but with one's own mind. Claustrophobia presses in. The instinct to panic rises. Yet if you push forward, the stone yields, and you emerge into a new pocket of space, triumphant. John had always been drawn to those squeezes. He liked to test his body against the rock, to feel the pressure of the earth all around him. That night, he wanted to find a passage he remembered from years before. The birth canal, a narrow chute that required a slow, careful crawl before opening into a chamber beyond. It was one of Nutty Putty's signature challenges. But the cave is a maze, its passages twisting and splitting. Without precise memory or maps, it's easy to mistake one corridor for another, and that mistake would change everything. The deeper they went, the cooler the air became. It carried that distinctive cave scent, damp stone and mineral dust, mixed with a faint, earthy musk of places untouched by sun or wind. The beams of their headlamps flickered across uneven walls, revealing streaks of tan and gray where water had once carved paths. The group moved in single file. Josh led for a time, pointing out familiar features. A crawlway here, a chimney climb there. They laughed as they wriggled on their stomachs through the tighter spots, boots scraping against rock, voices echoing strangely in the confined tunnels. John kept up easily, though his frame was broader now than in his teenage years. He had filled out in college, built muscle, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who had found his purpose. Still, underground, he moved with the same curiosity and steady calm as he had when he was a boy. After a while, the group reached a chamber where the ceiling rose high enough for them to crouch and catch their breath. Someone cracked a joke about who would get stuck first. Another teased that Josh should lead, since he was thinner. The laughter echoed off the walls, masking for a moment the awareness that in Nutty Putty, those jokes had sometimes turned into rescues. John grinned, brushing dust from his gloves. "I want to try and find a birth canal," he said, his voice steady but tinged with excitement. "It's been years." Josh raised an eyebrow. "You sure you remember where it is?" "Yeah," John replied with a shrug. "It's just down here, I think." He led the way now, crawling through a low tunnel that sloped downward. His headlamp threw light across the walls, glistening where moisture clung to the rock. The passage narrowed, but that was what he expected. The birth canal was supposed to be a challenge. He slid forward on his stomach, arms stretched in front, chest pressed against the earth. The limestone smeared against his clothes, damp and sticky. Behind him, Josh's voice echoed faintly. "You get up there?" "Yeah," John called back. "Think this is it." The tunnel angled downward more sharply now. He had to exhale to flatten his chest and squeeze farther in. His shoulders brushed both walls at once. The roof pressed low against his back. He grunted and pushed with his toes, inching forward into the dark. But this wasn't the birth canal. It was a different tunnel altogether. Narrower, deeper, and worst of all, it didn't open up at the end. The tunnel dropped at about 70 degrees, forcing John nearly upside down. His feet were above him, his head angled downward into the earth. He shifted, trying to find space to bend his arms, but the walls closed in like a coffin. He exhaled, trying to flatten himself farther. His chest compressed painfully against stone. With a determined grunt, he pushed again, convinced that just a little farther would lead to an opening. But the opening didn't come. Instead, he slid farther into the funnel-shaped chute, his shoulders locking against the walls. His headlamp beam reflected off rock only inches from his face. There was nowhere left to go. John stopped, breathing hard. The sound of his own breath filled the narrow space, loud against the silence. He tried to reverse, to inch backward, to shift his arms, but the tunnel pinched tighter around him. His chest pressed harder against stone, limiting how much air he could draw. "Josh!" His voice was muffled, echoing back in strained vibrations. From behind, Josh's lamp flickered faintly in the tunnel. "Yeah, I'm stuck." At first, it didn't sound serious. Everyone who crawled Nutty Putty got stuck at some point. A momentary wedge that required a twist of the hips or a strong push with the legs to solve. Josh chuckled. "All right, back up a little, wiggle it out." "I can't." John's voice carried an edge this time. Not panic yet, but a note of strain. "It's tighter than I thought." Josh moved closer. Peering down the narrow chute where his brother's boots protruded, he saw how sharply the tunnel angled downward, how little room there was for maneuvering. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach. "You sure this is a birth canal?" Josh asked, his voice lower now. John gave a dry laugh that ended in a grunt. "Doesn't feel like it." He tried again to reverse, planting his toes against the wall and pushing. His muscles strained. The rock dug into his ribs, his arms uselessly pinned at his sides. After several seconds, he stopped, panting. "It's no good," he said finally. "I'm wedged in here." The cave pressed around him like a second skin. The earth itself seemed to squeeze tighter the more he fought. For the first time that night, a flicker of fear crossed his mind. Not the fleeting fear of a tight squeeze, but the deeper, more primal terror of being trapped. And he was upside down. Every second in that position made his heart thud harder, blood rushing to his head. Behind him, Josh's voice came, steady but urgent. "Hold on, John. We'll get you out." But deep in the rock, John already knew this wasn't just another stuck moment. This was different. The cave had him now. For a few long seconds, the only sounds in the passage were John's shallow breaths and the scratch of his boots against stone. The silence pressed down as heavily as the rock itself. Josh's headlamp beam wavered, throwing jittery shadows across his brother's legs. "All right," Josh said finally, keeping his voice calm, steady. "Let's try this slow. Push with your legs while I pull." John shifted, exhaled, and tried to wriggle backward, but the tunnel had tapered like a funnel. His chest was compressed so tightly that he could barely draw breath. The clay-slick walls gave him no leverage. When he pushed, the pressure only seemed to drive him deeper into the trap. "Nothing," John grunted. His voice was strained now, edged with frustration. Josh bit his lip. He was a younger brother, but in that moment he felt the weight of responsibility. He wanted to say something reassuring, something light, but the truth was sinking in. John wasn't just a little stuck. He was pinned in a way that was different, more dangerous. The rest of the group had lingered back in the chamber, laughing and waiting their turn to crawl. When Josh backed out of the passage, his face pale, the laughter died instantly. "He's stuck," Josh said. "Really stuck." The others scrambled forward, peering into the narrow shaft where only John's boots protruded. One of them shone a light down past Josh's shoulder. The sight of John wedged headfirst, barely able to move, sucked the air out of them. "All right," one cousin muttered, forcing calm into his voice. "Let's get him out." They tried in turns. Two men braced themselves, gripping John's boots and tugging while he tried to suck at his chest and push backward. The rock groaned faintly under the strain. John grunted in pain. "Stop, stop." His voice echoed up the shaft, sharp with panic. "You're just wedging me tighter." The rescuers froze. John's breathing grew ragged, upside down, with his diaphragm compressed. Every breath was a fight. His lungs struggled against the weight of stone pressing into his chest. Each inhale was shallow, inadequate. Each exhale felt like it might be the last. He tried to keep his voice steady. "I can't get enough air like this." Josh squeezed his brother's boot, the only part of him he could reach. "We'll figure out, John. Just stay calm." "I'm trying." A humorless laugh echoed from the rock. "Not easy in here." For a moment, all of them sat in silence. The cave pressing in. The earth felt alive, as if it were listening to their struggle. The weight of miles of stone above their heads suddenly seemed crushingly real. It was clear within minutes. This wasn't a problem they could solve themselves. No amount of pulling or tugging would free John. They risked breaking his bones or crushing his chest if they forced it. Josh turned to the others, his face tight with urgency. "We need rescue. Now." Someone scrambled back toward the surface, their headlamp beam bouncing wildly against the walls. The narrow tunnel seemed endless as they retraced their path, heart-hammered with the knowledge that every second mattered. Above ground, the desert night was cold and empty. The messenger raced for a phone, hands trembling as he dialed 911, and reported impossible. "A man is stuck underground upside down and we can't get him out." Deep below, John was left with his brother, and a few friends crouched at the tunnel mouth. Their lights illuminated only his boots, his jeans streaked with mud. The rest of him was swallowed by rock. "Talk to me," Josh said, desperate to keep him alert. "I'm all right," John lied. His voice was strained, the words punctuated by sharp intakes of breath. "Just uncomfortable." He tried to shift again, wriggling his shoulders, but the rock held him as if molded to his body. His headlamp cast a dim halo against the wall, just inches from his nose. Beyond that, only darkness. In that silence, pressed by stone on every side, he felt the first deep tendrils of fear. Not the thrill of a challenge overcome, but the raw, primal terror being trapped alive inside the earth. And far above, the world turned unaware, while in Nutty Putty Cave, time began to slow. When the first call came into Utah County Search and Rescue, dispatchers knew the cave by name before the caller even finished. Nutty Putty. It wasn't the first time they'd been summoned there. In fact, since its discovery in the 1960s, the cave had developed a notorious reputation. Multiple rescues had already been carried out for people trapped in its squeezes, and though all had survived, each incident underscored the cave's danger. But this call was different. This wasn't just a scout wedged in a crawlway or a teenager panicking mid-squeeze. The dispatcher's voice grew tense as the words repeated. He's stuck upside down. He can't breathe. Within an hour of the 911 call, rescue vehicles began to converge on a lonely desert road. The stillness of the night was broken by headlights bouncing over dirt tracks, by the crunch of tires pulling up near the cave's gated entrance. Rescuers stepped out into the cold November air. Sheriff's deputies, paramedics, and volunteer cavers who had trained for scenarios just like this. They moved quickly but not recklessly, hauling ropes, drills, pulleys, harnesses, and medical packs. Some of them had been inside Nutty Putty before. They knew its layout, its treacherous angles, its tendency to play tricks on memory. But none had ever faced the exact problem now waiting in the rock below. The first wave of rescuers entered the cave close to midnight. Their headlamps cut through darkness as they crawled, dragging gear behind them. Radios crackled, voices echoing strangely in confined space. The group reached Josh, and the others still clustered at the passage mouth. Relief flickered across Josh's face when he saw them, but it was tempered by exhaustion and fear. "He's down there," Josh said, his voice hoarse. He pointed to the narrow chute where John's boots protruded. "He's been stuck almost an hour." The rescuers knelt, shining lights down. What they saw made their stomachs sink. John, wedged nearly upside down, his body swallowed by stone. His chest was compressed, his arms trapped at his sides, his face pressed toward rock only inches away. One rescuer wriggled headfirst into the chute until he was close enough to speak to John. "Hey, John, my name's Andy," the man said, voice steady. "We're here to help you out." John's reply came faintly, strained. "Glad you're here. Hang in there, okay? We're going to take this slow." The rescuer shone his light along the rock, assessing the geometry. The passage narrowed just below John's ribcage, creating a choke point that pinned him like a cork in a bottle. There was no room for leverage, no way to twist his shoulders free. And worse, his head-down position meant that time was already against him. Back at the surface, more rescuers coordinated plans. The only way to free John would be to reverse the direction of gravity. They needed to pull him back up the chute the way he had come, but carefully. Too much force could break ribs, dislocate joints, or collapse the fragile rock around him. The team began rigging a pulley system inside the cave, anchoring ropes to secure points in rock. It was awkward, slow work in the cramped conditions. They drilled bolts into the limestone, the sound of metal on stone echoing like hammer blows in the earth. Below, rescuers passed word to John. "You're going to feel some tugging soon. Just relax and let us do the work." John tried to steady his breathing, though each inhale was shallow and tight. "Okay," he whispered. With the ropes rigged, the rescuers gave the signal. 3, 2, 1 pull. The line went taut. John's body shifted slightly upward, his boots jerking as rescuers strained on the rope. For a moment, hope surged, just trickled down, pebbles shifting. Then a sickening sound. Crack. One of the anchors in the rock broke free under the strain. The pulley snapped loose. John slid back down into the chute, wedged even tighter than before. His gasp echoed to the tunnel, edged with panic. Stop! 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 The rescuers froze. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. The sound of drilling reverberated like thunder, each vibration rattling stone dust loose from the ceiling. When they finally clipped John into the system, hope surged again. Slowly, the rescuers began pulling. Inch by inch, his body rose. Good job, John. One called, "You're moving." But the rock fought them. His body snagged at the ribcage, then again at the shoulders. He cried out in pain, and the rescuers paused, adjusting angles, easing the pressure. At one point, he rose nearly a foot. It felt like victory. Then, a sharp crack as another anchor pulled free. The line sagged. John slid back down. This time, he didn't just return to where he'd been. He slipped even deeper, more tightly wedged than before. A groan escaped his lips. No, not again. The rescuers fell silent. They knew they had just lost precious ground. Josh remained near his brother almost the entire time. His gloves were caked with mud, his face lined with exhaustion, but he refused to leave the chute for long. He held John's boot whenever he could, speaking words of encouragement down the narrow passage. "I'm right here, John. You're not alone." At one point, John whispered back, "Thanks, Josh. Tell Emily I love her, okay?" "Don't say that," Josh snapped, his voice cracking. "You'll tell her yourself." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by John's ragged breathing. As the sun climbed higher outside, the hours underground stretched into an eternity. Each rescue attempt was followed by recalculation, new plan, new anchors drilled, new pulleys rigged. The cave floor grew littered with ropes and hardware. Mud smeared across every surface. Rescuers rotated in and out, their bodies aching from lying flat in the cramped space, their minds dulled by fatigue. Yet none of them considered leaving. They were bound to John now, bound to the desperate hope that somehow, through sheer persistence, they would free him. But beneath that hope, a quiet dread spread. Every medic on scene knew the truth. An upside-down body could only survive so long. The pressure on the heart, the swelling of the lungs, the pooling of blood in the brain, all were working against John with each passing minute. Still, they pressed on, because giving up was unthinkable. By the time darkness fell on the second night, John had been trapped for more than 24 hours. Above ground, floodlights bathed the desert in artificial daylight. Below ground, the rescuers kept drilling, hauling, pulling, whispering encouragement. And still, John was trapped. The second night in Nutty Putty Cave was colder than the first. A chill seeped through the desert air, biting at the rescuers huddled above ground around fires and generators. Beneath the surface, however, the air was still and stagnant, thick with dust and sweat, carrying the faint metallic tang of drilled stone. By now, everyone knew the truth they didn't want to speak aloud. Time was running out. Inside the chute, John's body bore the unmistakable signs of strain. His face was swollen from blood pooling in his head. His eyes were red, lids heavy, voice weaker each time rescuers asked him to respond. A paramedic wriggled close enough to check his vital signs, awkwardly pressing a stethoscope against his chest in the cramped position. "His heart's under serious stress," the medic whispered to the others. "We're pushing the limit here." Upside down, gravity worked like a cruel hand, dragging blood toward his head and lungs, starving his lower body of circulation. His diaphragm had little room to expand, forcing each breath into shallow gasps. John, however, refused to let fear consume him. He spoke when he could, cracked weak jokes to his rescuers, and even offered prayers aloud in the dark. His faith was both a shield and a tether, though even it strained under the weight of stone. The rescuers weren't finished. They devised a new system, more elaborate than before, drilled anchors secured with resin, a series of pulleys for mechanical advantage, adjustable straps that could cradle his legs and hips. One rescuer crawled in to explain the plan. "John, we'll pull you up slowly again. This time, we'll do it in short lifts, one step at a time. Just stay loose. Let us do the work." John's reply was faint but steady. Okay, let's try. The team braced themselves. 3, 2, 1 pull. The rope went taut. John's body shifted, rising an inch. Another tug and another inch. For a moment, hope surged through the chamber. The system was working. But then a sharp, sickening sound. Crack. One of the anchor bolts tore loose from the limestone. The pulley system lurched violently. The rescuers scrambled to stabilize the line. But gravity claimed John again. He slid back down, wedged tighter. His cry of pain echoed through the rock. Stop. Please stop. The rescuers froze, their own faces twisted with frustration and dread. After that attempt, silence filled the chamber. The only sound was John's labored breathing, rasping against stone. The rescuers crouched in the mud, staring at the ropes, the broken anchor, the unforgiving rock that seemed to mock them. One of them whispered what they were all thinking. We're running out of options. Josh, crouched near his brother's boots, clenched his fist until his knuckles whitened. No, we're not done. We can't be done. His voice cracked with desperation. We promised him we'd get him out. But promises meant little against physics, against gravity, against the crushing reality of the cave. Between attempts, the rescuers did what they could to comfort John. They fed him sips of water, wiped dust from his face, adjusted straps to ease pressure on his legs. They talked to him constantly, even when his replies dwindled to single words. One rescuer prayed aloud, voice trembling in the dark. Another told John about the sunrise above, how the desert sky was painted pink and gold. Josh whispered stories from their childhood, summers on hikes, family dinners, the laughter of their siblings. Stay with me, John, he said over and over. Just stay with me. John's answer was faint, almost lost in the stone. Trying. By late into the second night, John's body had endured nearly 28 hours inverted. Medical experts knew survival past that point was nearly impossible. His heart was giving out. His breathing slowed. His words became slurred. At 11:56 p.m., his pulse faltered. Then it stopped. The rescuers tried everything. Chest compressions, oxygen, desperate maneuvers in a cramped shaft. But the position was unforgiving. Gravity itself was against them. After nearly 30 hours of struggle, John Edward Jones was pronounced dead. The cave fell quiet. The rescuers sat in stunned stillness, their helmets bowed, their hands resting uselessly on the ropes. For hours, they had fought against the earth itself. And now, despite everything Nutty Putty had claimed him, Josh wept softly at his brother's boots, the last part invisible. Rescuers placed a hand on his shoulder, but had no words. What comfort could there be when the stone had won? Above ground, the word spread slowly. The floodlights burned on, illuminating a desert where 100 rescuers stood in silence. Radios clicked, generators hummed, but no one spoke. In the cold November night, grief settled over Nutty Putty Cave like a second skin. When John's heart stopped, the cave seemed to change. For nearly 30 hours, every sound, every breath, every strike of a drill had been in service of one goal, to bring him out alive. Now, in the silence that followed, Nutty Putty became something else. Not a place of hope, but of mourning. The rescuers sat in the mud, helmets dim, staring at the narrow chute where John's body was wedged. Some had worked nearly without rest since the previous night. They were bruised, cut, exhausted, but none of that compared to the weight pressing into their chests now. Normally, in the aftermath of a caving fatality, a body is recovered. Families need closure. Loved ones need a chance to say goodbye. But in Nutty Putty, the situation was unlike anything they had faced before. John was trapped nearly 400 feet inside, down a twisting maze of tunnels, at a sharp inverted angle. To remove him, rescuers would need to widen the passage by chipping, blasting, or drilling, at great risk to themselves. Every strike carried the chance of collapse. After hours of grim assessment, the conclusion was unavoidable. John's body could not be safely retrieved. Above ground, John's family waited under the glow of floodlights. Emily, his wife, stood wrapped in a blanket against the desert cold, her face pale and drawn. She had been holding on to hope through every long hour, praying for the miracle of his return. When officials approached, their faces told the truth before their words did. "I'm so sorry," one said softly. "We did everything we could." Emily bowed her head, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She was 26 years old, widowed with a young daughter and another child on the way. Around her, John's parents and siblings wept openly, the desert air filled with the sound of grief. In the following days, officials debated what to do with Nutty Putty Cave. The risks of recovery were deemed too great. To attempt to bring John out would endanger more lives, the very thing rescuers had fought so hard to prevent. With the family's input, the decision was made. John would remain in Nutty Putty Cave. In a way, the earth itself had claimed him. The narrow passage where he'd become trapped would be his resting place. To prevent further tragedy, authorities resolved to seal the cave permanently. Crews returned to the site weeks later. The entrance was filled with concrete, hardened into an immovable wall. A brass plaque was set into stone at the surface, bearing John's name and date, a memorial to man entombed below. Nutty Putty Cave, once a place of thrill and challenge, once echoing with the laughter of scouts and cavers, fell silent forever. No one would crawl its passages again. Emily later spoke of her husband's final hours with grace and faith. She described him as steady, kind, devoted to his family, and strong in his belief in God. "He was doing what he loved," she said, "and I know he's with God now." John's children would grow up hearing stories of their father, of his humor, his gentleness, his courage. He would live on in their lives, not through the way he died, but through the way he lived. For the caving community, John's death was a sobering reminder of the dangers that lurk underground. Training manuals and safety courses now cite Nutty Putty as an example of how quickly conditions can turn fatal, how unforgiving the earth can be when mistakes are made. For Utah, it marked the end of a beloved but treacherous landmark. The playful name Nutty Putty belied the risks it held. Now, it was no longer a place for exploration but a tomb, sealed and silent. And for those who were there, who worked for 30 desperate hours to free a man from the earth's grip, the memory never faded. They carried it with them always. The sound of his voice, the weight of the ropes, the moment when hope slipped into silence. Josh Jones never forgot the final words exchanged in that cave. The squeeze of his brother's boot, the whispered prayer, the unfinished sentences that lingered in the darkness. For years, he would replay them in his mind, wondering if he could have done more, if somehow he should have stopped John before he slid into that fatal chute. But in the end, all he could hold on to was the truth of their bond. Two brothers side by side, fighting until the very end. "Tell Emily I love her," John had said. Josh had promised he would, and he kept that promise. In the Utah desert, the hills still rise quiet against the sky. The wind still brushes over sage and stone. Beneath, Nutty Putty Cave remains sealed, its passages silent, its clay-lined walls untouched. And deep within, where stone narrows to a choke point, John Edward Jones rests, not forgotten, but remembered as a husband, a father, a son, a brother, a man whose story echoes in the dark places of the earth. When the concrete hardened at the mouth of Nutty Putty, it did more than close off a dangerous cave. It closed a chapter in Utah's outdoor history. For decades, Nutty Putty had been a proving ground for Boy Scouts, students, thrill seekers, and amateur spelunkers. Its sticky clay and twisty passages were a rite of passage, a playground for the brave. But now it was a tomb, and that fact changed how people looked at it forever. In the weeks after John's death, Utah County was awash with grief. Newspapers carried the story daily, their headlines stark: "Caver dies in Nutty Putty." Local radio stations broadcast interviews with rescuers, priests, and neighbors. Churches across the region held vigils for John's family. For many, it wasn't just a tragedy itself. It was the way it happened. The image of a man trapped upside down, deep in the earth, unable to be freed even by dozens of skilled rescuers, haunted people. It struck a primal chord. The fear of being buried alive, the helplessness of entrapment, the futility of human strength against the weight of stone. Parents who once proudly sent their kids into caves now thought twice. Scout leaders who had used Nutty Putty for years swore never to return, even if the cave had remained open. "It's not worth it," one leader told the press. Adventure isn't worth a child's life. Among cavers, the impact was even sharper. Nutty Putty had long been infamous for its squeezes and choke points. Veteran spelunkers had warned newcomers, don't take it lightly. Several rescues before John's had proven how unforgiving the cave could be. Still, no one expected it would end like this. In the months after, caving forums lit up with debates. Some argued that Nutty Putty should have been closed years earlier, that the warning signs were obvious. Others defended the thrill of exploration, pointing out that risk was part of the appeal. But one consensus emerged: safety had to change. Training programs began to emphasize the dangers of pancake passages. Long, flat tunnels were getting turned around or stuck was a real possibility. New caving guides referenced Nutty Putty by name as a cautionary tale. What had once been just another cave became a symbol of the risks lurking underground. Beyond Utah, the story captured national and even global attention. Articles appeared in the New York Times, CNN, and the BBC. For weeks, the rescue was followed like a gripping drama. Each update watched with anxious hope. When John died, the world mourned with his family. But fascination didn't end there. Writers, filmmakers, and podcasters returned to the story again and again. Documentaries were made. New specials aired on anniversaries. Years later, a feature film titled The Last Descent dramatized John's final hours, blending fact with artistic interpretation. For many viewers, watching was painful but necessary, a way to process the horror, to imagine the bravery, to confront the vulnerability of human life against nature's indifference. For John's family and many in Utah's Latter-day Saint Mormon community, the tragedy became a moment of shared faith. John's steadfast prayers in the cave were retold in church talks and memorials. His wife Emily spoke of the strength she drew from God in the years after. Community members reflected on mortality, on family, on the importance of preparation. Life is fragile. One pastor said at a vigil, but love is not. John's love for his family endures, even in the silence of cave. The story of his death became not just a tale of misfortune, but faith under pressure, of courage in the darkest place. Today, Nutty Putty's entrance is invisible beneath layers of concrete, marked only by a plaque and the memories of those who ventured there. For some, the sealing was a necessary act, a way to prevent another tragedy. For others, it felt like closing the door on a piece of Utah history. But for everyone, it became symbolic, a reminder that the earth holds places humans cannot conquer, and that sometimes the price of exploration is too high. Children who once dreamed of crawling through Nutty Putty now tell the story in hushed tones, a kind of modern folklore. Cavers invoke John's name as a lesson. Respect the cave or risk paying the same price. The community moved forward, but the echo of Nutty Putty, the echo of John Jones, remained. Thanks for listening. I hope I will see you in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe. For now, sweet dreams.